collapse if the government can't move quickly. Can the Chancellor look at this issue very urgently? 2,500 people rely on urgent action from the Treasury to make sure that their transport infrastructure and system is sustained and retained.
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to talk to my honourable friend further about his particular constituency issue, which I know does pose particular challenges. We have committed to providing local authorities and indeed all departments with any funding that's required to support public services, including local transport infrastructure in their communities.
Okay. Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents that will benefit from the measures the Chancellor announced last week, can I sincerely thank him for the action that he has taken and for the responsibility that he's carrying, and we are all rooting for him to succeed in the task ahead. The challenge, as I think has been described by others, is for those workers that don't benefit, particularly the 5 million self-employed, the degree of anxiety is increased because they've seen a ship sailing carrying others, but not them. I think they'll be reassured that the Chancellor has given a clear commitment to do something, but many of them are facing a cash flow crisis right now. So can the Chancellor say a bit more than he has done already to be reassuring about how quickly he can implement the measures that he's considering?
Chancellor.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable member for his warm words, and I appreciate those. What I can say to him is, as I said, we are looking at pace and what support can be provided. The fact is that 5 million universe that we're dealing with contains such a wide variety of different people where we don't have the ability to target support. That's the challenge that we have in designing something that gets to the people that we want it to help, whilst at the same time being affordable, while not having to benefit absolutely everybody. That is proving to be problematic, but we are hard at work on it. In terms of delivery, it is almost certainly going to be the case that we would have to build another brand new system to deliver any support. I think it is right, and I'm sure honourable members on both sides of this House would agree, that in terms of prioritising system design, the scheme that we have set up for 90% of the workforce that is employed should be delivered first and quickly, and that is what we've committed to do, ideally by the end of April. And we're looking at how we can do these things in sequence or in parallel. But I take his point. People are anxious, which is why we deferred the self-assessment tax return that is due shortly to provide some cash flow benefit. We've deferred VAT to a very significant degree, which will help with cash flow benefit. And many self-employed people will benefit from the business interruption loans, which are also interest-free.
Philip Oliver.
Number 6, sir.
Thank you,
Minister.
We're providing cash grants of £10,000 to over 700,000 small and medium-sized businesses across England, and grants of up to £25,000 per property for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. We estimate that these combined measures will benefit up to 1 million businesses in England. Local authorities will deliver these grants over the coming weeks, and subsequently will have information about the number of firms that have benefited at a local level in due course.
Philip Oliver.
Mr. Speaker, I declare my interest as a member of Kettering Borough Council. Can I thank the Chancellor and the Treasury for coming forward at top speed with this business support package? And can I also thank all the hard-working staff at Kettering Borough Council who will be actually delivering these grants to local businesses? And will the Minister send out the message to Kettering and the country that when the economy comes roaring back once this pandemic is over, local authorities will have played a key role in ensuring that happens?
Minister.
Well, I very much thank my honourable friend for that very wise comment. We very much share his views. Local authorities are absolutely crucial to delivery of a whole range of the support that we're giving now, and we will be very much acknowledging their role. We also, as he will know, are supporting them through the business rates process and also through the hardship fund as well.
Andrew Lowe.
11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend will know, rent-a-room relief has been a feature of the income tax system since 1992. In 2016, the government raised the threshold to £7,500. This is designed to deliver the government's objective of supporting individuals' living standards and freeing up space in the housing market. It also reduces and simplifies the tax administrative burden for those affected and has taken some taxpayers out of self-assessment entirely.
Andrew Lowe.
It was 11. Given that some 37% of homes in the country are under-occupied, my honourable friend will realise that encouraging more owners to take lodgers in could provide affordable housing to thousands more people. Could he please look to review whether there should be a higher level, perhaps 9,500, for live-in landlords with 2 or more lodgers, And would the Minister be willing to have a virtual meeting with the Lodger Landowners Association at an appropriate time?
Well,
Minister.
I thank my friend. I'm always delighted to meet him. In 2016, as I've mentioned, the government raised the threshold. In 2018, the government consulted on the scheme, and there was a consensus amongst the respondents that the relief provides an effective incentive for people to make their spare rooms available for rent. But of course, I take the point he raised. He's put it in the Chamber squarely on the record, and as with all tax policy, we will look at this and other measures and keep them under review.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we are all united here in saying that nobody should lose their home as a result of financial hardship brought about by the coronavirus pandemic. Again, we absolutely welcome the steps that the Chancellor and the Treasury have taken so far, but is it possible to find more fiscal support to be provided to safeguard tenants in the private rented sector so that we can guarantee that these people also are able to keep their homes in the months ahead?
Well, as my friend will be aware, we have specifically ruled out the possibility of eviction for 3 months, and we will continue to look at that situation as well.
Stuart Anderson.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly discuss school funding with the Secretary of State for Education. At the spending round, the government committed to a £7.1 billion cash increase in the funding for schools in England by 2022-23.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you. I understand there's immediate pressing issues for the department, but after this, would my right honourable friend arrange to meet with myself and the Education Secretary to discuss funding of a secondary school in Wolverhampton?
Minister.
I'll be very happy to give that commitment to my honourable friend, and he will be aware of the significant allocation to capital funding that was set out by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, in the budget, and obviously part of the discussion at the comprehensive spending round will be the allocation of that budget.
Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Minister is meeting the Secretary of State for Education, will he also talk about funding for early years and nursery sector? The 30 hours free childcare isn't working, and many of these nurseries were facing the inviability before the current crisis.
The honourable gentleman raises an important point, because I think across the House people recognise the importance of early years and early interventions there. But he'll be aware of the wider package of funding showing the government's commitment to education, not just in primary schools, secondary schools, but also the measures set out by my right honourable friend in the budget on further education as well.
Stephen Craig.
Number 10, sir.
Minister.
I think the numbering, Mr. Speaker, has jumped around a bit in the last few hours. We have been clear that the NHS will get whatever funding it needs to respond to the coronavirus. The Chancellor announced at budget a £5 billion response fund, and we have already allocated a significant proportion of that to a range of measures.
Stephen Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What frontline staff do in the NHS every single day is remarkable at the best of times. What we're asking them to do now and in the weeks ahead will be incredibly challenging, both in terms of physical and emotional pressures, but also in terms of the personal risks to NHS staff. So would my right honourable friend reaffirm that this government, as well as providing the extra money that was announced in the budget, will do all it can to ensure that frontline NHS staff get all of the equipment that they need, including protective clothing, to get the country through this crisis?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and the Chancellor has made clear we will do whatever it takes to protect our NHS front line, not just on PPE, as he correctly identifies, but also looking at the additional capacity, for example, in the independent hospital sector, looking at the support, the £1.3 billion that was allocated to speed up the discharge of patients, the £1.6 billion allocated to local authorities in terms of adult social care, and of course the funding, such as the £30 million for diagnostics research and the £10 million for diagnostic testing that has also been allocated in recent days.
Annalise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we really require as a House more specific detail about exactly the funding and arrangements across government that are being provided specifically in relation to testing and PPE availability, because we're all hearing from staff that they do not have the resources that they need. So please can the Minister indicate to us, he talked about that funding, to what extent is it actually being spent in the field currently, and what discussions has his department had with BEIS and the Department of Health about pulling in additional manufacturers, not just for ventilators but also for PPE and testing as well? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady will know from the statements made by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, that significant efforts have been on this, working with domestic manufacturers, but also procuring additional resource and stock internationally. In terms of funding, we have been very clear with the Department of Health, they will have whatever funding they need, and that has been the case to date.
Owen Thompson.
Question 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Last Friday, the government announced that it was deferring value-added tax payments for the next quarter so that UK VAT-registered businesses will not need to pay any VAT alongside their normal VAT returns from now until the end of June. That is a deferral worth over £30 billion, or 1.5% of GDP. HMRC already offers help to businesses struggling to meet their VAT payments with arrangements such as time to pay. In light of the outbreak of COVID-19, the Chancellor has outlined a range of measures to help business through the crisis, including grants, loans and relief from business rates worth more than £330 billion. The Treasury will continue to review and make further announcements as events unfold.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly we in these benches welcome the actions that have already been announced so far by the Chancellor to support the economy during the current outbreak. Given the particular strain felt by sectors such as hospitality, will he consider reducing the VAT rate they're charged as well as the deferrals already announced?
Well, I thank the gentleman for his question. Of course, he will be aware that those businesses will fall under the VAT announcements that have already been made for the next quarter, and as he will know, they are already also the beneficiaries of grants for the smallest businesses of £10,000 and for larger ones in hospitality, leisure and retail of £25,000.
Alistair Carmichael.
12, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government takes seriously its climate change responsibilities, including the target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions. This means by 2050, this means enabling a diverse range of low carbon technologies, and we see the use of marine renewables in the future energy mix, though developers must demonstrate how these can compete with the low prices achieved by wind and solar technologies.
Alistair Carmichael.
In order to compete with these technologies, they have to get from the stage of research and development to commercial deployment. The industry knows that. They've come up with a mechanism known as the Innovation Power Purchase Agreement. Is there any reason why the government are not engaging with that? Because I have to tell the Minister that these developers are not going to hang around in this country forever. If they can't make that step here, they will go elsewhere and do it.
Aware of the 1,700 that work in his constituency and across Wales and Scotland. I'm aware he wrote to the previous Exchequer Secretary who moved post before he could get a reply. It is true, though, at the moment that renewables are 5 times more expensive than wind and solar, but the government will engage in a dialogue with the industry as we look to resolve this and move forward in a constructive way.
Andrew Rosendahl. Not here. Paul Bristow.
Number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Low-paid workers will continue to benefit from the above-average pay rises, with the national living wage set to reach 2/3 of median earnings and to be extended to workers aged 21 and over by 2024, providing economic conditions allow. This is projected to benefit nearly 4 million low-paid workers.
Okay. I'd like to thank the Minister for that response and for everything he's doing to protect jobs in Peterborough and across the country. I was proud to stand on our manifesto in December, particularly our commitment to protect the low paid. The government have taken vital steps in the short term to protect jobs. Could my right honourable friend confirm that this budget is also providing a £200 tax cut for the typical family in Peterborough?
Absolutely, I can confirm to my honourable friend that a typical employee will be around £104 next year better off by the cut in national insurance, and then also the freeze in fuel duty, alcohol duties and the abolition of other taxes such as the tampon tax will also be of significant benefit to many of his constituents who he's been fighting very hard for since he came to this place.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many low-paid workers are actually self-employed. And when I raised this matter with the Leader of the House yesterday, he said in column 27, the government are inevitably conscious that when we close places by order,
and that has an effect on people's livelihoods. There's a societal responsibility. Many of these low-paid, self-employed people work, for example, in the music industry. And I just want to say to the Minister, I know we've got an urgent question coming up, they'll be looking for more reassurance than we've heard so far this morning, that the government is actually going to introduce a scheme and is going to do it soon.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has set out very clearly both the range of measures that we've taken, but also the determination that we have to come up with an enduring solution that addresses the range of challenges. I think the whole of the Treasury team is fully aware of how distressing and how challenging people are finding it out there, and we are working as fast as we can to come up with a solution that works for everyone.
David Linden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. I think if the current coronavirus and financial crisis has taught us one thing, is that we need to look again about the issue in terms of 0 hours contracts and the difficulty that puts many of our constituents. And I very much welcome the measures that have been brought forward in terms of support for businesses, for employees. I very much hope that this afternoon, when we get the question on self-employed, there'll be support. But one group where there is a lot of concern are 0 hours workers. So can the Minister outline what support the government is going to bring forward for 0 hours workers in Glasgow East?
Minister.
Well, if they are on PAYE, they are eligible for the job retention scheme. But the honourable gentleman makes a very fair point about the range of concerns that exist, and we continue to look very carefully at what we can do to enhance the measures that have already been announced. He will be aware of the enhancements to the welfare package of an additional £6.5 billion that has been put in by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor's announcement so far, and we will continue to look at what more can be done.
Bill Esterson.
Can I encourage the Minister not to make the perfect the enemy of the good in designing this scheme? There are many self-employed workers who worry about their inability to put food on the table this week. They're finding the universal credit system completely overwhelmed. So can I encourage ministers to put forward, announce the scheme and make sure the cash gets through, and it has to be soon, otherwise people are going to be in real hardship.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman makes a very reasonable point, and that's why we've tried to move those interventions forward that could be done quickly. We've done them as quickly as we can. So with respect to universal credit, we've increased the UC standard allowance. We've increased the standard allowance from £317.82 to £409.89 per month for single claimants. We have increased the local housing allowance. We've had a relaxation of earnings rules for self-employed UC claimants, and we will continue to look at every measure that we can to have an impact in the lives of those people that are suffering as he described.
Patrick Brady.
Mr Speaker, but every measure that we can, but the Chancellor just appeared to rule out a universal minimum basic income. And is that not quite disappointing? Because the way to answer these questions, the way to avoid thousands of people being laid off and ending up on universal credit and potentially getting trapped in the benefit system is to provide that minimum income guarantee for everyone, which will also help to provide a fiscal stimulus in the economy once we start to get through this crisis.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I think my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, set out very clearly the reasons why we have some concerns about, and indeed would not want to have that universal guarantee. We want to make sure that the interventions we make are targeted at those that are most in need at this time, and not give money unnecessarily to people who are wealthy.
We now come to Topicals. John Morrissey.
Topical question 1, Mr Speaker.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
No.
Mr Speaker, we are facing an unprecedented challenge as a country, as a government and as a society. The spread of the coronavirus has precipitated the extraordinary but necessary actions taken by this government over the last week to protect people's health, their livelihoods and the economy we all rely on. There will be challenging times ahead, and despite the significant economic interventions that we have put in place, we will not be able to protect every single job or save every single business. But I am confident that the measures we have put in place will provide support to millions of people and businesses and ensure that we do get through this, we get through it together and emerge on the other side both stronger and more united.
John Morrissey.
The startup loan program has been hugely successful in getting thousands of new businesses off the ground, particularly in my constituency of Beaconsfield. Does my right honourable friend agree that the announcement that this program will be extended is hugely welcome news for entrepreneurs right across the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a champion for entrepreneurship in her constituency, and rightly so. The Startup Loan Programme is an excellent programme providing grants of £25,000 for budding entrepreneurs. It's been operational for some years now and has provided almost 70,000 loans, putting to work almost over £500 million. And it is absolutely right, as we think about our future coming through the coronavirus, it will be the entrepreneurs of tomorrow that help create new jobs and drive the prosperity that we all will want to see.
John MacDonald.
Can I again welcome much of the Chancellor is doing, and we wish to work with him as positively as we possibly can in this very difficult period. Can I just return to this issue about zero-hour workers, though? The Chancellor said very clearly that this applies to all those who are on PAYE, and I welcome that. But the point that we've been making is that many of these, in fact most of the zero contract workers, are not on PAYE. They're called Lim B workers. So this scheme doesn't apply. I understand he's doing his best and I understand the complications, but he also said that the compensation for zero workers, employers may compensate on the basis of average hours worked. The unions in this field representing those workers have urged that surely this should be mandatory, but also it should be applied to all zero-hour and variable-hour workers based upon average earnings over the previous weeks. Now, that is exactly how their holiday pay is calculated at the moment, and it's an accurate reflection of what they earn. We need some urgent action for this sizable group of workers, at least nearly 1 million of zero-hour workers, maybe at least another 1 million more.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we are putting in place the detailed guidance for the scheme, we're actively considering the question of how best to average earnings of people in this situation. I very much take on board the suggestion that he's made, and I know my team are engaging with those unions as we speak to try and get the details right.
John Burren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Chancellor and indeed his team for the robust policy response we've seen to this crisis so far. But may I ask them to continue to focus laser-like on the issue of cash flow, which is particularly important to smaller businesses, particularly important to the workforce, particularly important to the vulnerable groups in society, because that issue, cash flow, is probably the most important when it comes to determining employment, something that is important to everyone in this chamber and the country at large.
Chancellor.
My honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of cash flow, which is why we have targeted our interventions specifically for smaller business at providing extra cash flow support, namely through the £10,000 grants to every business in receipt of small business rate or rural rate relief, and indeed deferral of VAT starting from today for the quarter, which, as my right honourable friend said before, represents over £35 billion or 1.5% of GDP's worth of tax deferral, providing immediate cash flow support. We have done the same thing for self-assessment payments that are due in the coming months, and have also, as of yesterday, launched a business interruption loan scheme, which my honourable friend has done fantastic work developing, and will provide interest-free, 12-month interest-free loans to small businesses, again, to help provide them the liquidity they need to get through this.
Ruth Capley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge that the government is dealing with an incredible number of challenges at this time, and I pay tribute on behalf of all MPs for the work the ministers, the front benches, and also all the people behind the scenes who are supporting them in this work. Now, the financial challenges of families with children have not yet been specifically addressed to date. So will the Treasury listen to the Child Poverty Action Group and work with the DWP on what I think is a fairly simple solution, and will put money directly into the pockets of families with children, and that is temporarily increased child benefit?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to Honourable Lady for the suggestion, and we will certainly look closely at the Child Poverty Action Group's recommendation.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents in Clwyd South, can I commend the Treasury team on their hard and speedy work over the last couple of weeks? And can my right honourable friend confirm that this government will stand behind businesses small and large in Clwyd South and elsewhere in Wales and the UK as this crisis progresses?
Chancellor.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments and also pay tribute to the work he is doing to represent his constituents and make sure that his local businesses get the support they need. I hope his businesses welcome the various interventions that we have providing cash flow support, tax relief, deferrals and subsidised loans to help them get through this difficult period. And if he has further ideas that he thinks we should consider, I would be very happy to talk to him further.
Cavan Jones.
Supply teachers play a vital role in our schools. Many thousands, including my constituency Ellie Atkinson, have found themselves out of work. Can I urge the Treasury to look at a way of supporting these vital workers, whether it be through direct financial support or making sure that these individuals can actually work in the schools that are actually being kept open?
Minister.
Well, the right honourable gentleman will know that school budgets have been allocated, and so the schools will already have those budgets allocated to spend, and that will not change. The announcements that the Chancellor has made through the PAY system is also about supporting those who can be supported through that mechanism. If there are other proposals, of course, I'm happy to engage with the right honourable gentleman and discuss those further.
Nicola Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's world-leading package of support to businesses? I have many charities and community care providers in West Bromwich East, including Sandwell Community Caring Trust, who are all working extremely hard to protect the vulnerable. I'd like to pay particular thanks to them and all the teachers and frontline staff in my constituency. Can he confirm that all charities that pay through PAYE will also be eligible for the scheme and relief package?
Councillor.
I thank my honourable friend for her support and join her in paying tribute to Sandwell Community Care Trust, who I know we will be relying on through this difficult period. I can confirm to her that charities are eligible for the Job Retention Support Programme, and further to that, I can also tell her that we have provided extra funding for the Department for Local Government to provide money to local charitable or caring organisations, especially to help with those who we are attempting to shield, the most vulnerable, to protect them against the effects of the coronavirus.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Yesterday in the Chamber, myself and the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham Hodge Hill raised the question about escalating prices in local shops and concerns about profiteering. Now, we understand that the Competition and Markets Authority may be looking into this. Can I ask him to urge them to very rapidly look at where this is taking place? Is it local shops? Is it wholesalers or cash and carry? Is it suppliers, or is it even actually to do with the international market in terms of perishable goods? It's a matter of real concern, and once they've found out where the problem is, will they bring forward measures to crack down on this profiteering?
Minister.
The right honourable gentleman makes a very reasonable point, and he sets out the range of issues there. It will be something that government is looking at, and I will liaise with my colleagues in BASE to make sure that they're focusing in on all the dimensions of the problem that he's outlined.
So Desmond Sway.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has been more creative and accommodating than his equivalents in any other jurisdiction. Setting aside the question of fairness, how practical is it to use historical tax data to try and impute a wage equivalent to the self-employed?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments. He's right. It is possible, certainly, to use those historical returns. They are a year and a half out of date, so they will be necessarily imperfect. They also do not provide an easy way to distinguish between those who are deserving of support, whose incomes are being affected by what is happening, and those who are much more wealthy and whose incomes are potentially increasing at the current place. But they do provide a basis and a universe to look at.
Bill Esterson.
When I mentioned that the universal credit system was overwhelmed earlier, the Minister may not quite have taken on board the point I was raising. A self-employed worker sent me a screenshot of their attempt to use the system yesterday. 33,383 people were ahead of them in the queue to use the claims section of the website. Unless this is resolved, people who need money right now, limited though that is in universal credit, simply won't be able to get hold of the money through the system.
Minister.
Well, firstly, the honourable gentleman raises an important point in terms of the pressure on DWP at this time, and that is a key reason why the design of the schemes we've been looking at, brought forward by the Chancellor, are those that don't add additional complexity and pressure onto DWP for the reason that he highlights. But one of the things we've been very actively working, I've been discussing with the Secretary of State for DWP, is where we can free up and reprioritise resource within DWP to assist with that, and we've been working very closely with the Secretary of State to do just that.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, airports and airlines are particularly adversely affected by the COVID-19 situation. Can my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, say a little bit more about the Treasury's thinking on a package of measures to support this important sector, particularly the many employees, many of them my constituents, who, of course, are finding it very difficult at the moment?
Chancellor.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, especially in his constituency, to highlight the importance of airlines and airports. They've been particularly impacted by what is happening. I can tell him I'm in active dialogue with the Secretary of State for Transportation and expect to write out soon on this particular matter.
Neil Hamby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath and in other constituencies, it is the public service workers who will get us through this crisis, not bankers, not nuclear weapons, so we must change our focus. The nurses, doctors and other public service workers who will be doing double shifts and working extra hours to get us through, can the Chancellor consider whether they will get tax relief on those extra hours so that they are properly rewarded and recognised for the tremendous effort they are making?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, we absolutely pay tribute to our public sector workers, particularly those on the front line of the NHS. As we speak, we have said that we will make any and all funding available to the NHS to provide and support that workforce. That is exactly what we are doing, as my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, outlined earlier. We did, in the budget, specifically change, in particular, the taper relief, which was causing recruitment, well, not recruitment, but hours challenges for senior doctors and GPs. That was a significant fiscal intervention, with providing over £2 billion of tax relief to make sure that there is no disincentive for those senior clinicians to provide the extra work at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The economic interventions that the Chancellor spoke about are very much welcome in Bournemouth East. Will he join with me in paying tribute to the armed forces for what they are doing and what they will do? But he should recognise, we all should recognise, this is in addition to their day job of keeping the nation safe. Could he say what will happen with the spending review? And would he agree that it's important that there is that additional capacity that our armed forces have, so we can deal with the threats that continue to exist, but also have that spare redundancy, that ability to step forward to help the nation in times of crisis?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of our armed services, and I join him in paying tribute to what they are doing, not just to keep us safe every day, but right now when we are calling on them to help us meet this public health emergency. They are doing extraordinary work as we speak to help improve the capacity of our healthcare system to respond to what is coming, and he's absolutely right. That is something we recognise, and it will be recognised as we think about funding for the armed services, not just today, but in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One newspaper is already reporting that the Chancellor is going to implement an income protection scheme for the self-employed and make an announcement within the next 24 hours. I must say I got from the Chancellor's early reply a slightly longer timescale when he was talking about the end of April. Coming back to this point of reassurance, can he give us some real reassurance now to those anxious self-employed people across the country that an announcement will be made very shortly?
Chancellor?
I think what I can tell the honourable gentleman is we would hope to be able to have something to say very shortly. In terms of something being implemented, that will take longer for the reasons I outlined earlier, and the honourable gentleman made a good point about capacity, whether it's at HMRC or DWP, to deliver brand new schemes. But in terms of saying what we are planning to do, that can be something that hopefully we can do relatively shortly. Implementation will take a longer time frame for the very clear delivery challenges that this scheme would pose.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend and the whole Treasury team for all the work that they're doing to help people through this crisis. Can my right honourable friend outline when employers will be able to access the job retention scheme and the furloughed workers? Cheers.
Chancellor.
Detailed guidance is available, further will be provided, and our aim is to build and construct the new scheme for it to be operational by the end of April. That is a challenge. We are already working night and day to construct something from scratch, but it will be allowed to be claims will be allowed to be backdated to the 1st of March, so businesses have security of knowing that the cash flow rebate will be coming. But as I said, the aim is to have it up and running so that the April payroll can be reimbursed through this scheme.
Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems with this crisis is we don't know how long it's going to last. I have businesses in my constituency, events companies, conference companies and sporting companies that are that have long lead-in times to organise their events, but can't cancel them yet and therefore get insurance as a result because there's no government guidance. Does the government have any plans to give guidance, particularly to the insurance companies and to events companies, that will perhaps say no events for the next 6 months?
Minister.
Well, we are working very closely with the insurance industry, and obviously they are underpinned by contractual obligations. What we did establish is that if they have got the cover relevant to non-specified diseases, then the announcements by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have triggered those to be paid out. But I'm very happy to look at any specific cases that individual members want to bring to me, I can take up with industry representatives.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the wake of the last economic crisis, when we needed the banks to stand on the side of small businesses, too often they didn't. And many of us have seen too many examples of small businesses being bullied into bankruptcy. So what can my right honourable friend say about the posture that he wants to see from banks at this time?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. The Chancellor and myself have had dialogue with individual heads of high street banks. I've been speaking to the head of UK Finance this morning and will be convening a meeting of bank representatives later today. We anticipate that the banks should be taking the most sympathetic forbearance measures possible, and we have set out very clearly, and my right honourable friend the Chancellor has set out in terms of the loan scheme, how it is interest-free for the first 12 months with no fees or repayment penalties. But I expect the banks to step up to the mark, as I know they will. And of course, you've got to remember that many of the people who are actually delivering this service in high street branches or in call centres are not very well paid and are working flat out to deliver what is a key service to our nation at this time.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, the message from the Prime Minister last night for our constituents to stay at home could not have been clearer, but many of our constituents who are staying at home will have increased energy bills as a result of that. Now, our honourable friend from Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross is coordinating a cross-party letter to the Government asking for a reduction on VAT and energy bills. Is that something they are willing to look favourably upon to support our constituents who will have higher energy bills as a result of staying at home?
Well, we're certainly very happy to look at whatever letter the honourable gentleman on a cross-party basis or his colleagues may wish to present with us.
Joe Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to follow on from my gallant friend from Bournemouth East and talk about our great armed forces. I've expressed my delight of the budget of 10 million identified for veterans' mental health. Can the Chancellor confirm that this will still remain a priority as this problem doesn't go away?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to give that assurance. I know my honourable friend is a champion, and quite rightly so, of our armed forces and speaks with great experience and authority on that. And he'll be aware of a number of measures that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has announced. That is one of them, and we stand by it.
Kevin Brennan.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Chancellor, a couple of times in the context of talking about the self-employed, he's mentioned wealthy people whose incomes are increasing. That's not what we're talking about. Yeah, we're talking about people who've lost their entire income overnight. And so can the Chancellor please provide some more reassurance that it is his intention to provide help to those people? It is his intention to say how he's going to do that very soon, and also to say to the banks in the meantime that they should be extending credit on a free basis, on the basis of what the Chancellor promises, so that people can get on with their lives.
So, the honourable gentleman illustrates exactly the issue with a scheme like this. Looking at historic tax return data from a year and a half ago gives absolutely no guide to whether someone today who is self-employed is in the situation that they are prosperous and indeed their income may be increasing versus someone who is not. Of course, I am sympathetic to those whose situation is being adversely affected by what is going on. The issue is one of finding a way to target help at those rather than having something that provides blanket cash subsidies to 5 million people, many of whom will not need it and will end up costing all of our constituents on modest incomes a considerable amount to pay. So it's about finding a way to target support on those who most need it, and that is what is requiring time and thought.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, would the Chancellor like to put on record and join me in thanking the people of Shropshire Council, the hard-working people of Telford and Wrekin Council? But can I say to him that cash flow for many local councils is becoming a real issue, with many councils having to borrow? Can I ask if he could encourage his officials in the Treasury to be a little bit more flexible over where finance can come from, and also the use of reserves?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to look at specific suggestions. I pay tribute to not just my honourable friends' council, but all councils for the sterling work they're doing right now in delivering our grant schemes to many of their small local businesses. We are in dialogue already with the Department for Local Government to ensure that cash flow needs of councils are adequately met, and there are some things we are doing actively in terms of the timing of the various grant payments we make as we speak to ease some of those near-term cash flow pressures.
Speaker, in relation to the emergency cash grant scheme, could the Minister further clarify if businesses with more than one premise in different towns are entitled to help per shop or just for the business as a whole?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the detailed eligibility criteria is online and will be provided by local authorities. The grants are done on a per-premises basis for businesses which are in receipt of small business rate relief and rural rate relief, and indeed those are the £10,000 grants. There are larger grants for those in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector of up to £25,000. The Secretary of State for Business has written already to local authorities who are, as we speak, writing to their businesses that are eligible for these grants to seek their bank details and start making cash payments as soon as is practically possible.
Just before I start the urgent question, I'm bothered that people are rather close in some of the areas around the chamber. If it's possible to try and spread out, I'd be very grateful. We now come to the urgent questions. Sir Edward Davey.
Mr. Speaker, will the Chancellor make a statement on financial support for the self-employed in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know many self-employed people are in real distress, but we are working urgently to address this problem. And I say to the self-employed, we have not forgotten you. Help is coming. But the policy and delivery is complex, and we cannot and should not rush to announce a scheme that begs more questions than it answers. The Chancellor has held meetings this morning with representatives of the self-employed and will continue to meet them this afternoon. But it's also important, Mr. Speaker, to remember that COVID-19 is an urgent challenge to our entire economy, affecting workers of all types. And it's essential that we respond swiftly so that people can keep their jobs and businesses can carry on. This is the basis of our coherent, coordinated and comprehensive plan. It's a plan that gives those on the front line the tools they need to tackle the virus, with all the support the NHS needs backed up by an initial £5 billion fund for public services. It's a plan that puts a shoulder behind business with a statutory sick pay relief package for SMEs, business rates holidays for all retail, hospitality, leisure and nursery businesses in England, and grant funding for small enterprises, as well as support through HMRC's Time to Pay scheme. As of yesterday, businesses with cash flow concerns will also be able to access the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, offering up to £5 million for SMEs through the British Business Bank.
And for larger firms, the Bank of England are providing... Oh, just one second. It might be easier if you just pass them down the line and let members pass them on than speaking to everybody. We've really got to... Yeah. OK, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which I know members across the House had raised questions on, is now available, offering up to £5 million for SMEs through the British Business Bank. And for larger firms, the Bank of England are providing a new facility to help support liquidity amongst larger firms. To all members of the House, I urge you to continue speaking, as I know many are doing, to the business leaders in your constituencies, and make sure they are aware that they are not alone and that help is indeed coming. Mr. Speaker, in this House, we are all standing behind business and everyone that works in it. To encourage businesses to retain staff, we're deferring VAT, and my right honourable friend has announced the job retention scheme to facilitate that as well. Taken together, this is a huge programme of support, and we will keep thousands of workers in jobs. But we know that there are thousands of self-employed people who have been wondering what the future holds for them. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has already set out a range of measures in support. Sole traders and freelancers will be able to access the Business Interruption Loan Scheme as long as activity is channelled through a business account. We are also removing the minimum income floor for the self-employed workers affected by coronavirus so that they too can access universal credit in full, which is not only the standard allowance, but also for those with children, disabilities or indeed housing needs, a wider package of support. At the same time, the next self-assessment income tax payments will be deferred until January 2021, helping those who had set money aside for those tax payments with immediate cash flow. Which means that there is a package on tax, on loans, and more widely through universal credit to support those through that safety net. Let me reassure everyone in this House and the self-employed people you represent that further help is indeed coming. But we have to make sure we get this right and target the right support towards those who are most in need. The Chancellor will provide a further update on support for the self-employed in the coming days.
Can I thank the Chief Secretary Treasury for that answer? And he knows that parties on all sides of the House have been supportive of the way the Chancellor and the Treasury have given support to businesses and to employees. But I have to tell him, for the 5 million self-employed people across the country who are in all our constituencies, they are in real stress. They are deeply worried. Yep. And while we all understand there are complications, the government has to move as fast as possible to meet their concerns, because they are literally, in many cases, simply running out of money. Yep. And I want to say this to the Treasury bench. It's important who we remember who the self-employed are. 80% of the 5 million self-employed are sole traders. Yep. They are our neighbours, our friends, our family. The vast majority are not wealthy people. They are cleaners. Yep. They are taxi drivers. They are plumbers. They are hairdressers. They are musicians, tutors and journalists. They are builders and electricians. They are childminders. These are people who are literally running out of money now, and we have to support them. Of course, there'll be those stories of people who are wealthy, who are self-employed, of course, but they are the minority. Yep. And if you look at the figures, HMRC's own data, 36% of sole traders, the majority of the self-employed, have taxable incomes less than £10,000 a year. And that compares with just 15% of employees on incomes that low. So we're talking about people on low incomes. 60% had profits of less than £10,000 a year. So these are people who were struggling before the coronavirus pandemic and are now facing ruin. Mr. Speaker, I think that an urgent package of help is needed now, and it's needed to be at least the equivalent to that that's been offered to employees. And while we all know the problems that the Treasury are facing getting this, can I say to him, if the package is capped in the way it was for the employees, yep. If it is temporary, yep. As it was in the case for the employees, and if, especially for the self-employed, there is some sort of clawback mechanism if people are being given money that they didn't need, then surely we can come together as a house, as a country, to make sure these people get the support that they need. It is not uncommon for the self-employed, when they do their annual self-assessment tax return, to have to pay money back to the Treasury. Surely, if money is given now so they can deal with the cash flow, capped in a temporary scheme, then that money can be clawed back the next time they do their self-assessment if it turns out that they didn't need it. So I honestly urge the Treasury Bank, Mr. Speaker, to move fast and not to allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. People need the money now. Please act now.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is right to emphasise the importance of timing and speed in this regard. And he also spoke in terms of how that could be targeted and the fact that there are many very deserving causes within the population. But it's probably also useful just to draw the House's attention to the fact that 1 in 10 of those who are self-employed are over state pension aid. Over 2 in 10, according to the 17-18 figures, were earning less than £2,000 of income, suggesting it wasn't their main source of income. Between 1.5 and 2 out of 10 are already on universal credit. Some of those remainders will be quite well paid, such as law partners and others, and some will be in employment and working, returning self-employment tax forms for part of their income in addition to their employment. So the point is that the population itself is complex, and we need to ensure that the measures are targeted correctly. He mentioned also, in terms of the mechanism, one of the themes that has informed the Treasury's approach is what is operationally deliverable as well, and that's one of the things that we're working through, because, for example, HMRC does not hold people's bank accounts, which is why the support package for those in employment was through the PAY system. And as the Chancellor, my right honourable friend, set out at Treasury Questions, the tax data is 1.5 years old. So these are the issues we're working through. He's absolutely right. Urgency is important. That is why the Chancellor is engaged on this, but it is a complex population that we are seeking to target.
Sir Graham Brady.
Recognising the complexity of solving this problem, can he give some indication of how quickly he would expect to have at least an interim solution in place for those who are desperate for help and desperate for clarity at this point?
So for some within this population, not all, but for some within this population, there will be some solution already through the loan that is available as of yesterday, the £5 million loan. That will not cover the entirety of this population, but in accordance with the business needs of some of those that are self-employed, there is support there. For some of the population, again, by no means all, there will be some relief through some of the measures the Chancellor set out in terms of property, business rate relief. But part of the complexity of the target population is that different measures work for different groups. That is part of what my right honourable friend is working through. But I recognise the point that he raises and other honourable members have raised, which is we do recognise the importance of timing on this issue.
Shall the Chancellor John Macdonald?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman and other members, no one's looking for a row over this. We're looking for a solution. And the reason that some members became irritated earlier was the emphasis in one of the Chancellor's responses on rich self-employed. They're not the people who are contacting us. They're exactly the same as he said. The ones that are contacting me at the moment are the plumbers, the hairdressers. Yes, some of the freelance artists as well, and others. They're in desperate straits. There isn't a member of the House, I don't think, who hasn't received representations. We're just looking for something that we can go back with them today to give them some assurance. We know how complicated it is, but we've got to find a solution quickly. I'd urge the government to at least set a deadline now that we can go back to our members and say, by the end of this week, there will be a proposal brought forward. The other assurance that people want is the thing the right honourable gentleman raised. If we can go back and say you will get the equivalent, the 80% or whatever, to what was offered on Friday to other workers, I think it would lift people's spirits that there's something is on the way. I also think as well that, look, many of these self-employed workers are that, just as other workers are having to sign themselves off sick. They don't have access to statutory sick pay still. And I have to say, asking people to survive on £94.25 a week is just an impossible ask. And when the Secretary of State for Health was asked on television last week, could he live on it, he said no. And I agree with him. We need the level of sick pay raised for everybody if we're expecting them to actually choose not to work and not have to choose between health and hardship. Can I say also one other point that was raised in the discussions and Treasury questions? Many self-employed workers may need to work reduced hours and cannot be furloughed in the same way as other workers under the scheme announced on Friday. The Chancellor suggested in Treasury questions that workers on reduced hours would not be covered by the scheme. If that is correct, what other work is being done to provide support for those workers, but also for the self-employed as well? One final point, in the Treasury questions as well, different groups and categories of workers were raised. I know it's complicated, but we do have to look at agency workers. It was raised by my honourable friend. But also, we now I've had nothing but emails, telephone calls from people working in the construction sector who don't know whether they should be at work today or whether if they go to work, they'll be safe. But also, let's use this opportunity as well to look at the exploitation by payroll companies and umbrella companies of people who are forcibly designated in many instances as self-employed. As I say, we don't want to row over this. We want to work with the government. In fact, Annalise and I are happy to come and do a shift if the Treasury wants. But we just want a solution. Might come up with slightly different solutions. But we need it quickly. And we need it effectively as soon as possible.
Well, just to help the House, I'm aiming for about 120. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first, can I welcome the constructive tone that the right honourable gentleman has struck, and whilst his offer to come into the Treasury may contravene some of the social distancing requirements of late, I do appreciate the spirit in which he made that point. And he's right, which is that we do need to move at pace, and we do need to work together on this, and that is indeed why my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has been engaging in further meetings this morning and will do so later today as we work through how to take this forward. In terms of the comments from my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, what he was drawing attention to was the complexity of the target population. And I think a number of members of the House would have concerns, not least as we look at, to the future, if we were subsidising some very wealthy of the self-employed. I take the point they're not the ones getting in touch with the right honourable gentleman, but it is important that our approach is mindful of what the target population is and how we address that. He raised the issue of reassurance, and I think that is a legitimate concern and one shared across the House. And I would draw the attention of his constituents, the constituents of colleagues on all sides of the House, to the comments that the Chancellor set out this morning, that we are working at pace on this. We recognise the issue that is being raised, and I hope that does provide reassurance, certainly in terms of an announcement, albeit the operation of any solution may take some further time, as the Chancellor set out. So there is considerable work going on. The population is complex. We are looking, as was raised in Treasury questions, at the burdens on different delivery mechanisms, whether that is through DWP, but also on local authorities, who themselves have their own staffing pressures in terms of those that are off ill. It is why we're exercising flexibility in lots of other areas to reprioritise resource into those areas to support. But it is important we have a scheme that is deliverable and is mindful of the other challenges that we're dealing with.
So, Edward Lee.
May I make a point from a public accounts point of view and urge on the Chief Secretary a system which is humane and rapid and above all simple. The Treasury traditionally and the Department of Work and Pensions are obsessed with complexity, targeting and clawback. So what we need is a simple system. Now, about 40 years ago, I suggested universal basic income to Mrs. Thatcher, and I got an earful for it, for my pains. But something like that, which is very simply rolled out, which can be claimed by the taxi drivers, the cleaners, these sort of people. Rich people will not bother with this. So just get on with it, make it simple, and do it now.
Well, my right honourable friend, as I say, wants us to get on. I refer to the meetings, the considerable work that is going on to get on with this. But as a former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, he will well know that many policy ideas start with the simple, but then the devil is in the detail of its delivery. And I recall many an interview he has given drawing attention to simple schemes that then were less simple when they were sought to be delivered. And I think what's worth bearing in mind is if one looks at, for example, the self-employed population, there will be some, again, a small number, but some who may be doing quite well in the current climate. Not what we are focusing on now, but there's some people whose trading will have seen a very small proportion. But there are many, many others who are suffering. And the question we're seeking to address is how do we target our measures at those who are most deserving, which is what the attention of the House is focused on, and we need to ensure that the scheme that is brought forward does likewise.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did realise and read in newspapers years ago there was a red Ed in the House of Commons. I didn't quite realise it was the honourable gentleman. But can I also have to try and have a conciliatory tone with the Chief Secretary? Obviously, there's very real concern. Like other members of the House, I've been bombarded with emails from people who are self-employed. And after this crisis is over, I think we really should sort out who is self-employed and who should be directly employed as well. But that's a debate for another time. So can I ask the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, we know of other countries like Norway, Denmark and Belgium who have come up with schemes for the self-employed, and whether he's looking at those international examples. Because surely if they're working in Norway, Denmark and Belgium, they can work in the UK. There are 330,000 self-employed workers in Scotland, creative industry, agriculture, forestry, fishing, construction, taxi drivers and the like. So can I ask him, if the government is looking at increasing the weekly level of sick pay from £94.25 to the equivalent of a week's pay at the real living wage, are they considering removing the lower earnings limit for qualification for sick pay and to ensure that everyone can access it? And are they also looking at ending the 5-week wait and universal credit so that the first payment can be a grant and a real payment, not a loan?
The issue of advance payments and universal credit. Firstly, one of the measures the Chancellor has taken is to increase the standard allowance. That's not the total quantum that people will get. I referred earlier to, for example, those with children, those with housing needs, those with disability, who will get more. And we have also changed it in terms of access, so people can get it quickly without face-to-face meetings, get it from day one. Linked to that, one of the issues with the advance payment that was often raised in the House was the concerns with then the subsequent repayments. But clearly, with the increase, the £20 a week increase that has been announced for universal credit, that eases in terms of some of the repayment issues, or it gives more within the allowance that will then be addressed in terms of the repayments. So there's been a significant increase in the universal credit, in part to address the issues there. And again, there's some operational complexity around a shift to a grant system because of the way that the IT system within universal credit has been set up. So we've sought to address the concern he refers to through the increase, and of course an advance can still be offered. In terms of statutory sick pay, again, changes have been made to facilitate that being paid from day one, and changes made, for example, in terms of employers with 250 or fewer employees, in terms of the measures that the Chancellor set out to support those businesses with those costs. He also mentioned, and this was a point in the previous answer, in terms of simplicity, and let me just clarify the point that I was making. The vast majority of people who are self-employed are suffering. That's what we recognise. But in designing the scheme, we are looking as to how we can design something that addresses the operational challenge that other members have spoken to. So let me give you an example. Part of the merits of the scheme that the Chancellor set out with what is, I think, for many people, a new concept of furloughing members of staff was because that gave a clarity operationally to the delivery of that scheme. So we are, in answer to both the previous question and the issue that the Honourable Gentleman raises, looking at what is operationally deliverable quickly, what can be done in a way that recognises the other challenges that apply, for example, in DWP and elsewhere. What is one that doesn't leave open the question that a small proportion of people who shouldn't be getting the targeted action get the support? So we focus it on the much larger cadre of people who deserve that help.
Thank you. In designing his scheme, will the Chief Secretary recognise that many self-employed people in the tourism sector have very seasonal businesses? So, for example, using February as a reference month would not be appropriate. Would he particularly see what can be done to help recreational charter fishermen who, because they paid harbour dues rather than business rates, have not been able to access the grant aid that their friends across the road from the harbour have been able to?
Well, the right honourable gentleman, in essence, draws attention to the challenge that emerged with some of the earlier questions, because the simpler the scheme, the less it accommodates often legitimate and deserving issues that members raise on behalf of their constituents. So very happy to have further discussions with him, but he will recognise the tension between simplicity and addressing all of the concerns that colleagues raise.
I have two constituents. One is that they're both musicians. One's in an orchestra, the other one is a freelancer. One will get 80% of his income paid, the other will be on statutory sick pay. Surely it's better to have a system where one wealthy freelancer benefits and 100 don't go hungry.
Exactly right. Well, again, as I referred to the earlier comments I made, what we're trying to do is target the support on those in need, to do so in a way that is operationally as deliverable as possible, mindful of the issues raised, but also that accommodates the other points that colleagues across the House have raised, which is how do we ensure that those who have legitimate needs are not excluded from the measures.
Julian Lewis.
Will ministers consider suspending the application of the loan charge for the period of this emergency and thus stop hounding self-employed people who are the subject of an important debate in this place last week?
So, well, I can provide a degree of reassurance to my honourable friend that the self-assessment has been deferred from July to August. That is one of the areas where the Chancellor has taken action to address concerns.
At Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, up and down the country, many of us depend on sole traders for jobs around the house and so on. In so many communities where we've had flooding, those houses, those homes are expecting people to come and do work for them. How on earth are those households supposed to say, we cannot have you come and help us out, repair our homes? They're desperate for plumbers, for electricians and so on. Those electricians, plumbers and the owners of the properties want to do the right thing. What's the advice of the government?
Without straining to every different individual case, the key advice from the government is to follow the medical advice. That has been set out following the Prime Minister's statement and updated on the government website, and that sets out the advice to workers, including what is safe to do and what is essential.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasury, in its unprecedented support for employed workers, took a fairly generous, overarching approach. I would urge the Treasury, and not just from what I'm saying, what the mood is across the House, to take a similar broad approach, accepting that certain people may get it if they didn't quite need it, to benefit the majority of people, self-employed, who will.
Well, I think these are issues which the Treasury is looking at in the design of the scheme. We recognise that for the vast majority of people that are self-employed, they are facing very considerable challenges now, and in the design of the scheme we are very mindful of that and the urgency that goes with it.
Over 400 self-employed sole traders and freelancers have already contacted me over the past 24 hours, and many of whom have already lost their work due to this crisis. So, as well as echoing calls made by others to introduce support to them as soon as possible, can I also ask the Minister to ensure that these measures of support are backdated, as the Jobs Retention Scheme, to help address the disruption that has already been caused by the COVID-19 epidemic?
Well, I hear what the Honourable Minister says in terms of things being backdated, but I think one of the challenges to date has been that the range of measures that the Treasury has brought forward hasn't always been understood in terms of what is already announced and what is already available. I draw attention to the fact that we are deferring income tax self-assessments, which won't need to be paid until January. We're supporting people through the welfare system with the measures I announced earlier, including on contributory ESA. We're increasing the universal credit and working tax credit by £1,000. We're suspending the minimum income floor for 12 months. We're introducing a 3-month mortgage holiday for those in difficulty. The self-employed will be eligible to receive support with their tax affairs through time to pay. The business interruption loan scheme will be available for some self-employed individuals up to the £5 million limit, and we have delayed IL35 as well. And I think one of the things that all members of the House can assist our small business community with, and in particular the self-employed at this time, is also drawing attention to the measures that have already been announced, and we in government stand ready to do that through a comms campaign as well.
Nusrat Ghali.
Mr. Speaker, I know my right honourable friend is working night and day to help businesses excuse me, and people stay in work, and I'm incredibly grateful for all the support he has given me as I respond to the self-employed in Wilden. But loans are proving to be quite an anxious decision for them if that's the only thing on the table. If I just read out an email from Anna, she's a self-employed wedding photographer. She's had to give up work. She's going to try and find work elsewhere. But she says, I'm loath to take any loans offered as there's no guarantee that future work will be able to take place because we have no idea how long this pandemic will last. Can I ask my right honourable friend to take into account Anna's dilemma when they come forward to make an announcement on the self-employed?
Well, my honourable friend is right to draw attention to the pressure and the decisions Anna and so many self-employed people are facing at this time. I would draw attention to the fact that it is interest-free for 12 months. And I think one of the key themes that we're very conscious of is this is a health emergency that is impacting into our economy. And these are viable businesses before this health emergency arose, and they will be viable businesses after we have overcome it. And so the question is, how do we bridge the gap? How do we support Anna and others through that period of time? The interest-free loans isn't the only measure. I've just drawn the House's attention to other measures that are available, and I would urge Anna and others to take advantage of them.
I would draw to the Minister's attention that while I appreciate the difficulties in coming up with these arrangements, that what's happening is that small traders are simply going along to universal credit and applying and blocking up the universal credit system because they are desperate for money from somewhere, so causing a problem for work and pension. So delay doesn't get the problem to go away, or people don't wait. They just try and find something else, which has a knock-on problem.
So, well, I accept the concern that the Honourable Lady raises, but I think she would equally accept that this is an unprecedented challenge and that the staff within DUP and elsewhere are working heroically to address this, to address the increased volumes. But the best way for all of us to address this is through the wider support for the economy as a whole. That is what was behind first the £30 billion fiscal measures announced by the Chancellor at the budget, then the further announcement of 350 billion, 330 billion of loans, as well as the wider package last Tuesday, then the further measures that were announced by the Chancellor on Friday. That is indeed on top of the measures the Bank of England has taken, for example, reducing base rates, the 200 billion of bonds. So a range of measures have been taken to support have increased, and we're reprioritising work within DWP to assist with that.
Andrew Griffith.
Mr. Speaker, my rural constituency of Arundel and South Downs has one of the highest concentrations of the self-employed in the country. So whilst I thank him and we thank him on this side of the House for the timely and unprecedented measures that he's come forward with, can I add my own voice to the growing consensus across this House for measures to be extended to the self-employed?
Well, I know my honourable friend speaks with considerable business and financial experience, and he will well know the issues around cash flow and challenges that many of the businesses in his constituency are facing. We absolutely hear his message just as we do the message from members across the House, and that is why we're moving at pace to address them.
Newlands.
much, Mr Speaker. Further to the point I raised, the Treasury question was echoed by the Shadow Chancellor, and said the newly underemployed must be supported further. But my constituent is a self-employed taxi driver with no work due to the lockdown. His wife and 4 children have underlying health conditions. Any universal credit application would mean their tax credit ceasing. A job seeker's allowance application would mean having to prove they were seeking work and engaging with their accountant. So can the Chief Secretary tell them how they possibly put food on the table and pay their bills?
Well, the honourable gentleman speaks to a real concern and a real issue. But I draw attention to the fact that one of the challenges we need is to communicate what support has already been announced by the Chancellor. And if I could perhaps give him, as an example, a family renting in Sheffield with 2 children would be eligible for around £1,750 a month in support, far more than the £94 per week, if you take in some of the additional things such as housing and children's support they have. So it's about what package of support is available, and the Chancellor has already announced considerable measures in that regard.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I listened carefully to what my right honourable friend said. He acknowledged that the vast majority of self-employed people were being impacted. So can I urge him, if he makes sure that whatever help is given is taxable, we can claw back any money that's overpaid to those that are doing well. But I think what self-employed people are looking for is a clear commitment today that whatever scheme is set out is of a similar magnitude to that for employed workers. If the Chief Secretary can say that, that will give people confidence to borrow, knowing they can pay the money back, and I think that will go a long way to solve the problem.
Well, as I have said, Mr Speaker, the Chancellor held meetings with small business leaders this morning. He's having further meetings on this issue today. He's very aware of the concerns raised by my right honourable friend and other members of the House, and we continue to work at pace on this issue.
Kevin Jones.
I'm sorry the Chancellor isn't here, but could I ask the Minister just to pass on to him is that the people contacting me who are self-employed are not wealthy individuals. No. They're individuals like Andrew Brown, who I raised last week, who's a freelance, as a self-employed graphic designer, whose income has disappeared. They're taxi drivers, they're small catering companies. Unless action is taken now to these individuals, not just relieve their hardship that they're facing, their businesses will no longer be in existence. And my fear is we're actually generating unemployment of these people for a long time to come.
Well, can I agree with the first part of that, which is he's absolutely right that the vast majority of people, I've made that point repeatedly. I referred earlier to how the target population has different elements in it, but the vast majority of those that are self-employed are facing enormous challenges, and we absolutely hear that, and I accept that. On his second point, though, it is the case we have taken a number of measures, but we recognise more is needed, and that is why my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is meeting with leaders on this today to look at what further measures we can bring forward.
Brian.
Thank you, sir. Can I just say, I do understand this is difficult. If this was easy, the Chancellor would have announced it last Friday with the rest of the package. But I think the self-employed people I represent just want a sign. They just want some hope, some indication. And I think they've had that today from the Chief Secretary and from the Chancellor. But could I just make a suggestion? For self-employed people and for all people right now, if you can't get the same in, then you've basically got to send less out. And the government worked magic last week with the mortgage companies, who seem to be falling over themselves to offer mortgage holidays. But all the other fixed costs that our constituents are facing, so utilities, insurance premiums, car finance, council tax bills which landed on the doorstep last week, and even for some, a business improvement district levy due next week, they're all still there. I wonder if there's something that the Minister can take back to the Treasury, maybe with help from the Shadow Chancellor, around those sorts of fixed costs, because they're dragging people down right now with a lot less coming in.
Well, my honourable friend is right to say that there are a range of costs, and we're looking at, as I say, as part of our support, what action can be taken, and he can see as an illustration of that the action that's been taken on mortgages and in support of renters as well, and that's both for mortgage holders directly, but also in terms of the buy-to-let market as well. So measures have been taken, but we stand ready to look at further measures.
Caroline Lucas.
The local economy in Brighton and Hove is overwhelmingly dependent on the self-employed, so I just cannot overstate enough how urgent it is to have some action on this. I don't know if he gave a deadline when he spoke to his colleague earlier, but if he didn't, could he please now tell us that by the end of the week we will have action? And in particular on universal credit, that isn't a fair option for many freelancers because it means they have to delve into savings that they've put aside because they don't have pensions. So we're going to push them into greater insecurity right now if we allow them to have to rely on that instead.
So, well, as I said in my opening statement, the Chancellor is meeting on this today, and we are hoping to bring forward proposals in the coming days.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome that the Treasury are working hard on supporting the self-employed. We have to remember these are local freelancers. They're mobile hairdressers, childminders, freelance driving instructors, photographers, musicians, IT consultants, home-based travel agents. They've lost all their income. Can the Minister confirm the package that will come forward for the self-employed, freelancers and sole traders will be announced by the end of the week?
Yeah. Well, I referred to the answer I gave a moment ago. We're actively looking at this, and we are hoping to bring forward proposals in the coming days.
Bill Esterson.
The way around the problem that the Minister and the Chancellor before him identified of giving money to people who need it was given to him by the Right Honourable Member who asked the urgent question. The money can be recovered later. Don't let the concern about a handful of people deny money desperately needed right now to really desperate people who can't put food on the table, get in the way of putting the scheme in place.
So, well, as his earlier question at Treasury orals pointed to, that is not the sole consideration. It's a question of what is operational delivery. Issues may be. It's also looking at things, for example, we don't hold people's bank accounts or how we would do it. It's how we roll this out. But the wider point he's raising, we recognise, which is that there are immediate issues for many self-employed people. That is what we're working actively on. That is what my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is engaged on in further meetings today. And as I said in the previous answer, we hope to bring proposals forward in the coming days.
Ollie Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You mentioned earlier the business interruption loan scheme. Will you confirm that all self-employed people will have access to it, that they won't have to give personal guarantees, and that they'll widen the scheme to include people like Oak North and Aldermore who are currently excluded from eligibility?
We're looking into that, but it is available as of now. It goes up to 5 million, and my understanding is it doesn't require personal guarantees. If it's any different, I will come back to him on that point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent in the East Nuka Fife runs a mobile catering business providing a service to both private and public events such as festivals. Having no fixed premises means that the support announced so far they don't benefit from, and the relaxation of planning rules that other food outlets can also benefit from to do home deliveries is also an issue, and they're struggling like many others to access business interruption insurance. The independent mobile catering sector could be utilised to support and provide sustenance for our key workers at this time. What amendments to the measures will the Chief Secretary consider to support this critical sector?
So, well, I know my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, is looking at a range of options in terms of how we adapt to the change of circumstances. For example, many pubs, restaurants had significant food orders, so looking at what it means there. There's food that would have been exported previously, where there may be difficulties in exporting. So there's a range of measures in terms of the food supply within which mobile caterers will have a role, and I know that the right honourable gentleman, the member for the Secretary of State for DEFRA, is looking at these issues.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, I have a large number of families where one partner works in the National Health Service and the other is self-employed. The children now have been sent home from school and there's no one to look after them because if they don't work, they don't get paid in the self-employed. So can my right honourable friend look at an urgency of the scheme, but also very specifically right now, the council tax bills become due on the 1st of April next week, and people are worried how they'll be able to pay. Can they be spent?
That this is a complex scheme we're seeking to design, but those are the sort of issues we're working through.
Meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got so many self-employed workers in my constituency, including over 1,000 taxis and private hire drivers. They will
questions, but they will respond to me. Given there is going to be in the meantime, either through offsetting tax bills, but also encouraging banks to be more generous with overdraft. Let's not forget that we all bailed out the banks when they needed it. Maybe it's time for them to do something now.
So, well, the Honourable is absolutely right in terms of the role of the banks, and a very clear message has been said by the Bank of England Governor in terms of the importance of banks showing forbearance applies to things such as credit card debts, but also giving away
find they're going to be disadvantaged. They won't get the topping up that an employer might give an employee. There will not be necessarily an immediate return to work, and the seasonality will affect their income, which of course wouldn't do an employee. Will those three very good points be taken into account by the Treasury bench?
Well, they are, Mr. Speaker, good points, and again they draw attention to this conflict between simplicity and addressing the various specific issues that Honourable and Right Honourable Gentleman has raised, and one of those, again, is seasonality, which obviously also has an impact. So this is why the design of the scheme is more complex than perhaps meets the eye, but these are the issues we're looking at, and again, we intend to bring forward proposals in the coming days.
Thompson.
Speaker, like many others, been contacted by many self-employed in my constituency who are welcoming of the support already offered, but in need of the absolute guarantee about what's still to come, and quickly. I mean, going to the shop to buy essential groceries for feeding the family, telling the checkout supervisor that the Chancellor says they can pay for it soon, isn't going to get that shopping. So how soon can we give that certainty?
So, well, Mr. Speaker, we hope to bring forward proposals in the coming days. I absolutely appreciate the concern, quite rightly, that the Honourable Gentleman is raising for his constituents. It is in part, but it doesn't address his specific question, in part why we've been strengthening the safety net of the welfare system as well, to address that. It is in part why the main measures we've taken is to support the economy as a whole, because that is the best way to get viable businesses, including the self-employed, back up and running once we deal with the health emergency. But it is also, within his question, the specific issue of the self-employed that we're looking at, and we do intend to bring forward proposals in the coming days.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While many of our supermarket shelves at times are empty, there is a food source that's currently going to waste, and that's fish. Most of our fishermen are self-employed, but they've seen their markets collapse because pubs and restaurants are closed and overseas markets have closed them. Could we look at a bespoke package to support our fishermen through this time, and particularly find ways that we can get their fish sold to people who can buy it and feed their families?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point. It is one I know the Secretary of State for DEFRA is aware of, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to have further discussions with him in the coming days. But he's right, the pub and restaurant trade having collapsed, there is food that would have been provided to them, but there's also capacity